Hello and welcome again to Logistics Landscape, our latest webinar. Today we're going to be talking with our MercuryGate experts about the latest developments in transportation, supply chain, and technology. My name is Michael Willard and I'm the moderator for today's broadcast. Before we begin, I want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees on today's webinar are muted. The session is being recorded and we'll share it with you shortly after the program concludes. You can also look for a recording of this webinar in the resources section of our website. That's mercurygate.com. It should be available later today. Our presenters have a lot of information to share, but we're planning to field your questions at the conclusion of the conversation. Please submit your questions at any time. You can use the Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your viewing screen. You'll see it near the chat box. Please be sure to use the Q&A box, not the chat box. We'll respond to as many of your questions as possible before our broadcast time concludes. This broadcast features two very special guests that I'm excited to introduce to you today. Phil Melton's going to be driving our conversation. He's an expert in supply chain operations and technology. Phil has a long history in this space, working with global brands like Nike, Columbia Sportswear. Since 2019, Phil's been working with MercuryGate as a thought leader in the global industry, product marketing, and supply chain consulting. Today, Phil is going to be talking with MercuryGate co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer Steve Blough. Steve helped found MercuryGate in the year 2000. Was following a successful career working for IBM Global Services. He's the chief architect of MercuryGate's transportation technology platform, and Steve has spent his career designing, developing, and integrating supply chain information systems in ways that lower logistics cost for all of our MercuryGate customers. With that, I'll step aside and let Phil and Steve begin their conversation. Phil?
All right, thank you, Michael, and thanks to everyone who is joining us today for this conversation. I'm really excited about what we're going to discuss today, and I hope you all get some real good value from this conversation and discussion, and I do want to wish you all a great and happy St. Patrick's Day. Steve, I'm really excited and looking forward to our discussion today, especially with you, because it's been a while since you and I have had a discussion like this together. So let's take a couple of seconds here and take a look at today's agenda. The first thing we're going to talk about is just the current landscape of where we are today regarding the transportation industry. Next, we'll jump into some logistics lessons learned that have come about over the time, and we'll dive deeper into those subjects as we go through it. And then finally, we'll talk about smart solutions that are available to support today's operations and technology needs. So let's jump into the first question, Steve. So, the price of gasoline for the consumer is increasing, as is the price of diesel fuel for truckers. So what might these increases really mean, or what might the impact be for the transportation industry?
It's a great question, and timely because of what's going on. I mean, things are certainly a bit crazy right now. I saw in the news, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where UPS is now shortening their window of time from where the fuel actually gets set. So it used to be 2 weeks, now it's 1 week. FedEx had done that previously, so it's in line. But really, the companies are trying to figure out, how do I recover and recoup the cost of fuel, since it's going up and up and up. It's interesting how varied it is across the country, and I think you've seen that, Phil. But it's becoming a reason or a way to look at, where do I really want to buy my fuel at? Stopping in one state could be significantly different than stopping in another state, right? And it all is driving capacity down, because now people don't necessarily want to drive too far or want to keep moving, right? And there's more demand to have less empty miles on the road, even taking sustainability into consideration, let alone, not to mention, of course, the increase in fuel costs doubling, or what it's gone through in the past year.
Yeah, I would say, just adding my own personal touch to it, like you said, I just recently drove clear across the United States from the Northwest to the Southeast. And to your point, some of the states were cheaper than others, but some of that might be attributed to the way that they do their tax structure within those states. But it was interesting because we would cross one state with high prices. I think they're in the mid 550, 570 or so per gallon. We'd get into the next state and there'd be these huge long lines at the pumps for truckers and people with, they're pulling their RVs and those types of things, trying to, find the cheapest price before they enter the next state. And I spoke to my brother, who is really an independent driver, long haul trucker, owner operator, if you will, about fuel apps. And he said, yeah, there's some out there. He actually mentioned one that you and I had spoke about before, but he emphasized that the prices, really to coin his phrase and yours, that he just said a few minutes ago, it's been crazy. The last month and a half or so, it's been absolutely crazy. And you bring up a good point too. I did read something around fuel surcharges going up, and they've gone up significantly. So the carriers are passing some of that cost on to the consumer, which is again just adding to our inflation issues, right?
Yeah, and typically, that week delay that UPS experienced wasn't a big deal, but when, prices are going up 40 cents in a week, a week delay could be, I'll say, I don't want to say catastrophic, but seriously impact their bottom lines, right? And then what it also does is starts to make biofuels very uh, more sort of advantageous, right? Or at least worth looking at. But and the good news of biofuels is, right, they tend to burn cleaner and all the good stuff that you want from a sustainability perspective. But at the same time, there's a lot of ethical issues of, hey, if I'm taking grains and food sources for fuel, how's that impact the price of food for the world, right? And now there's some countries that are struggling as it is. Now they can feed less people with the same amount of money. So there's all kind of things that go into the different or different options, if you will, for the fuel industry, and including if you look at what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now, there's grain embargoes, there's all kind of things that are driving up prices as well. So we're kind of in a perfect storm at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And of course, they always seem to go up a lot quicker than they come back down, right? So.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I'd like to go back to my cross-country trip. You and I talked about this, and I know it's been a thing for a long time. And that is really that there's been a driver shortage issue for some time, right? I think you said the other day something like 80,000 short or something. I made this same trip back in 2020 when this whole thing, the pandemic hit us. We drove from the southeast to the northwest, and during that drive, we saw some trucks and we saw some trains running, and maybe it was just early on, but I cannot remember a time that I've seen more trucks on the road than just recently, and maybe that is building into the driver shortage. So my question really is the driver shortage really a shortage, or is it just a blip because of where we are and trying to get some normalization back into our supply chain? And will it be the same in the new normal? So if all these people going to driver school or getting their credentials or CDLs or whatever, are they going to have jobs, a year and a half from now if things level off?
Yeah, interesting point. I mean, when you look at the driver shortage, I mean, it's fueled by a lot of things. One of it is the drivers are aging, right? And I saw something where like 60% of the drivers are over 50. So you start to think about that. The driver pool is getting older, and to bring new drivers on, it's not a quick process. And so for someone young to get a CDL, it becomes, it's not like, hey, in 2 weeks I'm going to be able to drive a truck. And then people starting new, like drivers leaving bigger firms and trying to start their own, to being their own carrier or their own owner operator. A lot of folks will never hire them because they haven't hauled freight as that agency long enough, right? So there's a lot of um, barriers to getting folks into the space. And it's funny because I always hear people on the news saying, "Oh, we're going to fix the supply chain problem. We're going to get more drivers. We're going to," none of these things are easy and quick fixes. And I think the driver shortage is real. And I think that to really get beyond it, we're going to have to start thinking differently and incent people differently to want to be in that process. But it's not going to happen overnight. And a lot of people don't want to be on the road and the long hauls. A lot of people don't want to do short hauls because they don't make them enough money. There's a lot of things that really are in competition with each other and really force the shortage and the capacity crunch that we're in.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think for me, the supply chain, when back in the days, many years ago, and both of us have been in the supply chain arena for many years. I remember the old bullwhip effect, right, and the conversations around that. And if you think about all the stuff that's sitting on the water today, that's coming into ports, that's just staged up. That's like a pig going through the python, right? I mean, it's going to be here for a while, right? Hey, you mentioned something earlier, and this is kind of our next question. Some of the things that are happening across the world today, right? And one of those you mentioned was the conflict in Europe. So, what impacts do you feel that current conflict will have on transportation industry, and to what degree will that impact be, and how long do you think that will actually last, if things get back to somewhat of a normal state?
Yeah, well, certainly what we just talked about, fuel costs are being driven by, a lot of the conflicts and things that are going on, certainly in Ukraine and Russia. They're impactful, no doubt about it. But it's more than just fuel costs. Think about product sourcing. I mean, there's things made there that aren't made or produced anywhere else in the world, in the Ukraine and in Russia, that are now either not being shipped out or embargoed, right? And those things now are, while at the moment may not be bad, a lot of those things will hit, 4, 6, 8 months from now, right? So it'll be even worse when, especially in like the chip industry. Uh, Areas you don't think about, application development. I mean, we've had Ukrainian programmers in the past, and that has pretty much just gone away. And there's a lot of development work in both Russia and the Ukraine that no longer is accessible. So that will impact just companies like ourselves in software development. We don't have Ukrainian developers now, but I'm just saying it is impactful. And then of course, when you think about security and cybersecurity, our industry, I'll say, has been a little lagging, I think, in security in general. You've seen in the past year some truck companies or carriers that have been hit with cyber attacks have been down. Their systems have been down for days or longer. And, I think it's heightened everyone's awareness of security. I know at MercuryGate, we've always had a strong focus on that, but a lot of that's driven by our customers, right? They demand high security and demand that from both an uptime and, making sure that their information is protected. So, I think you're going to see that change the world a lot in the near future and it's not just like MercuryGate, it's MercuryGate, our partners, our whole ecosystem of folks that work, making sure all that data is secure and tight. And it's just be getting more and more uh, uh, visibility, if you will, in the supply chain. So I think all these things are impacted by what's going on there. And of course, this all leads to a high level of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Like what's going to happen next? I better do this or not do that, and it's not really clear how that's going to spill off into Europe yet. But with their dependence on the Russian fuel, it could be an interesting problem ahead.
Yeah, there's two things there that you brought up. One of them earlier, you brought up, I think it was the wheat exports from Russia. It's one of those things that, they provide, I think, a third of the world's wheat exports, and that's going to go down. If we're already doing biofuel and we got the problem going with the food, well, that's just going to exacerbate that issue, right? It'll make food sources and availability harder to get. And then you talk about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And, that's been something that's been out there for a long time, and we use it and we talk about it quite a bit in marketing and other areas, especially now with the conflict in Europe. But as we begin going forward, and as hopefully that settles down or things change there, how do we begin to remove that fear or that FUD, if you will, the fear and uncertainty and doubt, and get back to a normal operations? I think that's kind of top of mind for me, especially working with our customers. How do we ensure that they feel strong, they're certain that we can deliver, we're doing the right things, those types of things. So it's just a question out there. I don't know if you want to respond to that right now. It's
No,
more
I
just,
think it's a great point. I mean, you know, to me, it's all about data and information. So the more data and timely data you can get, the less fear and uncertainty you have, right? So if you know what's going on and you know where your shipments are and where they need to be, that starts to alleviate that feeling that you're out of control or you can't manage what's happening, right? So, certainly the world we're in with the digitization of information being passed, almost real time electronically, higher quality data, the whole curation of data as it's getting better and better in our space leads to the reduction in those type of things. Although, if you were shipping stuff out of Ukraine yesterday, trying to find where you're going to get it tomorrow isn't going to be solved until you get that new partner to deliver those things, right? So.
Yeah, yeah. I think the biggest thing that has really impacted us, other than the current situation that's going on in Europe, is really the pandemic, right? It hit back in 2020. And it's been kind of just dragging on and on and on. And sometimes I read and it looks like it's slowing a little bit, or maybe I just don't hear about it as much. And then I know that each state has its own mandates on masks and all kinds of things. But as that continues to boil up and down, and I think we had a conversation the other day about maybe China having more and a different variant or whatever. What is the impact on the industry and our industry, if you will, with this pandemic thing? Do you see it normalizing? Do you see it getting better? Do you see it being kind of all over the place?
Well, I think, you hear it on the news, right? We're switching more from a pandemic to an kind of an endemic kind of environment where, we're dealing with it and we're building up our antibodies and all the things that we need to have. I think some of the reactions have been really difficult for the transportation industry, crossing a border and 2 hours later having to get a test before you go back. I mean, there's just some, I'll just say crazy things that almost make no sense, right? So these policies get enacted, and I think you're going to start to see that relaxing, certainly. But at the same time, these things are going to ebb and flow, just like in China again. They're shutting down cities. It's going to start impacting the supply chain again, and these things aren't going to go away tomorrow. I think we'll learn to handle them better and deal with them in a better state. But you know, I I think with the latest one, right, like 6 to 8 thousand truck drivers can't cross the border between Hong Kong and China now, right? I mean, that's a lot, and it's a big impact. And it'd be interesting to see, will China start to go like the rest of the world and not be so rigid in their, uh, uh, you know, requirements for COVID folks, or you know, will it stay more the same? But all this stuff ultimately, look like we're going to start to get a reprieve in some of the ocean costs. Well, now it looks like they might be driving back up again, right? So it's an interesting dynamic. And then you throw in the Russia stuff with air freight can't cross Russia now, and U.S. planes, or blah blah blah, right? Ukraine, and there's a lot of things that are going to be very impactful to all these different things. What's interesting is though, I was talking to one of our customers the other day, and they were 2 years ago. I talked to them, and they were kind of dead in the water because of COVID, and all their products were coming out of China. And I said, well, you're looking at near shoring, or some Mexico, Canada, as other sources of producing the goods. And they said flat out, no, we can't. It takes too long. Well, guess what? They are now that's gone on this long, they are now going to do that. They're going to start offshore or near shoring these things, and they have to do it because they've been maintaining such a high level of safety stock, right? And and that's very costly too. So it's interesting. The world adapts, and we will adapt to these things. And there's a lot of opportunities for all of us here, right? And not to take advantage of folks, but to help folks, right? And provide solutions to get through these problems.
Yeah, I was just reading actually this morning about how there's opportunities for I guess, the price reduction of product, or things like, well, for like Nike or Columbia Sportswear, other companies that have kind of not out of stock, but out of their normal time that they sell T-shirts and shorts or jackets and boots, and they have a backlog of potential inventory that they're actually selling those to people like TJ Maxx's and others, right, to try to reduce that backlog of inventory because they couldn't get it out of port in time to get it on the shelves. So they just basically are kind of reducing it, getting it out, getting it sold to those lesser, the places where you go to get your cheaper clothing, if you will, not cheaper clothing, but reduced
I know what you
price.
mean. Yeah, sort of an outlet of some sort,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, kind of an outlet store. Yep, yep. Hey, we've spoken about this before, but I want to kind of bring it up again, and you've touched on it a couple of times already in our conversation today. But sustainability plays a huge factor in the transportation industry, given some of the current administration directives. What are you seeing with sustainability and some of those directives? I did read something again about, California's got these real strict ones that they're putting in place, and they're looking at rolling that out nationally from the current administration that we have today, which is a huge impact to some of the carriers out there and the truck drivers, trying to make sure that they have the right equipment. But what do you see as far as sustainability going forward?
Well, it's definitely a struggle when you look at what's going on in we're talking about carrier and driver impacts and and those type of things, but it's it's something that's here to stay for sure, right? And it should be. I mean, we should be conscious of what we're doing in the environment, how we're maintaining and keeping the environment cleaner, and what we can do to make those things happen. So, whether it's electric vehicles and driving, no pun intended, to that type of a vehicle is one thing, but really, and I think it was Freight Waves this morning sent out a thing that said, hey, there's 80 some million, whatever, of CO2 being, released for empty miles on the US roads, right? And I really think, we've got to figure out better how to get rid of those empty trucks driving down the highway. Something like 1 in 3 are empty, or I forget what the number is, but you get the point. There's a lot of them, and it's almost impossible for one company to do that, right? Like, you can certainly improve what you do individually, but at some point, and I won't mention the name, but there was a large brewer who worked for 10 years to get rid of or reduce their carbon footprint, and they did an outstanding job. But they got to a point and they said, we really can't do anymore because we don't have anything that would handle, a backhaul or alleviate that empty truck. So now, it becomes more of a community, and you see some stuff in the press of folks kind of looking at this. And I think it's an area where maybe some of the digital freight providers that you see out there are starting to really focus on the ability to fill those empty trucks, if you will, and at the same time, truck carriers trying to reduce or get newer equipment that burns less or emits less CO2. And it's truly a challenge, and not just in this country, but worldwide, right? So, whether it's ocean vessels or airplanes or trucks, we always talk about trucks and empty miles. Well, you know, airplanes and others are burn a lot of carbon as well. So, and now if you think again about the war, routes are now, planes aren't flying over Ukraine anymore, right? So they're flying longer routes, burning more fuel. And again, all these things impact sustainability or the CO2 emissions. And so it'll be interesting to see how we start to combat some of those. I mean, I know folks are looking, I know MercuryGate's doing work around drones and things to try to reduce footprints on roads. We do things around optimization to stop some of that unnecessary carbon burn, right? So that everything's more efficient and effective. But again, I think till we really get to where companies that might even be competitive start to cooperate on transportation, it'll be hard to get beyond a certain level, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to the next question. So one of the things we did see during this past year or so, maybe since the pandemic had hit, was a need to purchase and deploy technology in support of a supply chain. In fact, I've read many times that there's been a huge uptick in companies earmarking large amounts of their budgeted dollars to digitizing their supply chain. Do you see that continuing?
Yeah, I do. And I think a couple things here when I really get into it, right? I mentioned it earlier, but to me, it's just fundamental that our industry starts to improve the overall data quality and the timeliness of the data, right? It doesn't do me any good to know tomorrow that this stock's going to go up yesterday, right? I mean, that's kind of thing it is, right? I mean, it's really I need the information when I need it so that we can make the right decisions. And to do that, you have to have that digitization, and it is uh, more widespread. Things like the cost of fuel and the need for efficiency, sustainability, all those things drive folks to want to have better, um, more automated type of processes with better data, right? So, everyone's sort of the golden ring these days is having, what's often coined autonomous logistics, not autonomous trucks, but a system that's running and taking into account historical information, actual data that's coming in right now, and taking the right actions, or at least at worst, I guess maybe is what I would say, presenting to somebody, hey, I don't know what to do. What do you think should happen here? So that people aren't just doing the mundane day-to-day things. That's just all running naturally. So, again, for that type of behavior, you have to have good data and timely data, right?
Yeah, I've spoken about this a lot of times, whether it's been in other webinars or the MercuryGate minute snippets that I was doing over the last couple of years. Data really is like the new gold, right? I mean, it needs to be curated, stored, reviewed, and utilized, and supporting all types of operations, especially the supply chain. It becomes a requirement really for the new future of logistics and supply chain. So let's discuss TMS in general, right? So MercuryGate at Mercury, we have what we call a TMS platform that really supports the idea of that smart transportation system. It has many of the capabilities to support pretty much any size of customer. In particular, I think shippers and 3PLs for the most part. Can you speak a little bit to how these markets can deploy our smart transportation system and our platform in support of their business, and what capabilities do you see as really the primary ones to deploy and get out there and begin using?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? So if you look at what's going on in the universities, supply chain's a hot education path these days in logistics, right? But the people that are coming out of the universities, they don't want to be tendering loads and you know selecting carriers, that kind of stuff, right? They want to be dealing with the analytical side of what's happening, and they want to be working on setting up, the analytical data to feed into dynamic workflows, optimizations, all the type of things that really lead into that whole control tower view, if you will. So they want to know predictive ETAs, and they want the system either to take the corrective action or present it to folks. They want invoices that are audited, indicating why they're not or out of compliance, if you will. They want quotes being sent out to drivers. It's interesting when I look at the industry and having been in it for more years than I'll admit to on the call. Um, it used to be people would do procurement events every 2 years, maybe 4 years, 2 years, 1 year, whatever. I mean, now it's almost like quarterly or even less time because everything's so dynamic these days. So you see things driving more and more to almost uh, at that point in time kind of uh, get me a new rate, which is what digital freight or automatic quoting or whatever you want to call that happens with a lot of the different providers that do that, whether it's Uber or certainly Amazon and others, right? So when I think of areas folks are really getting into, um, one that comes to mind is final mile, first mile. Everybody wants to do more e-com, right? So you know making those adjustments real time. And when you think about combine reverse logistics with those things, like how do I do that, right? Um, you need a system that's doing that for you. You can't adjust it quick enough manually. So you need the system looking at all the feedback, taking into account doing machine learning on and predicting, hey, this is how long it's going to be in transit on this route, right? This is from this point to there, it's going to take this. I may have to now, let's say I've got a pickup for a return. I may have to give that to a different truck because this guy's not going to make it on time, right? So there's all kind of things that are going on automatically. And one of the things that leads to is, again, think of if I'm more efficient on my routes, I'm burning less carbon, I'm in a better sustainability model, right? Hopefully the optimization tools I'm using are telling me how much carbon I'm saving. And, so it's a quantitative thing, not just, I know I'm doing better because I'm more efficient, but, here's how much, you're saving because of this type of truck you're using or whatever, right? And then the final thing there too is the whole idea of real-time notification out to customers. And all these things apply basically to everyone in the supply chain, whether you're a logistics company, you're a shipper, or even brokers. And I don't mean that in any derogatory way, but they all have the same problems of, okay, yeah, maybe the broker's not routing the truck, but I still need to notify customers. I still need to predict ETAs. I still need to do the things that are really driving all of the customers out there to select what we would call smart kind of transportation tools, right? And it's huge when you start to think about doing this across your whole supply chain. So now I look at my inbound, my outbound, even my e-com, and figure out what's the right way to do all this. Like, it's not as simple as just give it to this carrier anymore. It's like, hey, I want to use these carriers to do maybe my pickups, do some line hauls, do some deliveries, some B2B, some B2C, right? All those type of things on the back end. So, and then making sure all that stuff gets allocated properly. Whether I'm a logistics guy or a shipper and I want to get it to the right cost centers, right? It's more than just executing all these things. It's making sure those things are actually divided up properly and the costs are truly understood for each of the areas of the business or each of the customers.
That's fantastic. So let's go to one final question. I want you to look into your crystal ball. I want you to talk to us a little bit about Q2 and beyond, maybe the end of 2022, into 23 if you want. What do you see? Will supply chains begin to normalize? Will the easing of the pandemic, maybe requirements help improve that smoothing out of the supply chain? Will fuel costs continue to rise, or will they normalize? Just kind of provide us, if you will, a summary of what you see for the future. Having been in the industry for many years myself with you, I think we could kind of draw on our history to look into the future. So we have a lot of data up here, right?
Yeah. Well, I think when these things start to happen, there's always this, well, of course, there's this wish that, inflation's not going to be as bad as it looks like it's going to be, or, fuel's not going to get as high as we think it's going to get. And hopefully if fuel gets high, it'll come down quick. Well, all those things could happen, right? But I think reality shows that it tends to be a little longer than folks think it's going to be. But again, those type of events often lead to lots of opportunities for folks to provide value in different areas than they were before. So, optimizing trucks now becomes, hey, how do I save costs for fuel? If I use less trucks, I use less fuel, I lower my costs, or maybe I don't lower my costs, I don't raise it as much, right? But I think if you look at the experts, right, they're predicting, maybe another 9, 10, 12 months of inflation or higher inflation before it starts to drop off. It could be higher. You don't know. I mean, it's hard to predict with something like what's going on in Ukraine. How long will that go on? I mean, you think of what they predicted originally. It sounded like it was going to be days, right? Now we're into weeks and could be, even longer, right? So it's hard to say. I just think that these things tend to always last longer than you think they are. But I think we're all ready. And again, if you have your supply chain or your transportation in a digitized fashion, it's going to manage these things for you. So you're going to know what the impact of fuel is. You're going to know how your rates apply or compare to others in the industry. You'll see which lanes are the highest costs, right? And the system can take some of those things and automatically adjust it for you. So, you know, I don't think there's anything to be afraid of here. I think it's just more of managing it, understanding it, and being ready with the right data to get through it, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think, it's been proven over the last couple of years how fast and quick people can adjust, and the agility of systems and that type of thing, to be flexible enough and to be agile enough to actually take these things. Maybe it knocks you back on your heels a little bit, and you go, okay, now this is what we're going to do going forward. And if you have the right applications in place and the systems there that are running it, digitized supply chain, you can kind of, like you said, take a look at the data, try to figure it out, and you can move pretty rapidly to the next phase and kind of weather the storm, if you will. So, Steve, thank you so much. At this point, I think I'd like to turn it back over to Michael. Michael, do we have any questions from the audience? I think you're on mute, maybe.
Yeah, sorry about that, fellas. We sure do. We definitely do have some questions coming in from our audience. And again, we reserve some time here at the end of our presentation to field some questions from everyone out there that's listening. And thank you, Phil, and thank you, Steve, for sharing a lot of that great information. Again, with the time we have remaining, we want to hear from our audience. So it looks like there are a couple of questions coming in already. I want to remind everyone that to submit your questions, open the Q&A panel at the right side of your webinar viewer. If you don't see the Q&A panel, just look for those three dots down at the lower right corner of your screen. Click those dots, you'll open the Q&A panel and be able to submit a question in to our experts today. With that being said, I'm going to jump right into them, fellas. Here's the first question. As a logistics company, I'm interested in doing more e-commerce. Other than using parcel carriers, I'm not really sure what to do as far as transportation goes. What kind of advice can you offer?
Steve, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's tends to be when people start doing e-com, there tends to be a run to the parcel carriers, which is natural, right? I mean, it's certainly the easiest thing to do is to start using FedEx, UPS, whoever, and they're great providers, obviously, and great service. Um, but a lot of times in the logistics world, folks want to look at doing things a little differently, right? And are there other options? Like I can think of during the pandemic, we had a shipper who they opened up their doors of their stores not to people but to parcel carriers to come in and move freight. So as they ran out of um, inventory in their warehouses, they started using their stores as little warehouses. Well, guess what they ran into? Parcel carriers either wouldn't show up or take all those boxes, or they limited how many they would actually move for them, or how many times it would show up. And again, not the parcel carrier's fault, but they have to do they just didn't have the infrastructure to manage that. So what we see a lot of our logistics guys doing is more of a kind of a hub and spoke kind of thing, where they'll go out and get local couriers and do some line hauls into a cross dock, or whatever you want to call a pool, whatever you want to call that facility, that then does the distribution, or the local final mile, if you will. And the beauty of that is, obviously, they can handle more than just maybe having a parcel carrier come pick up. And they might even do that with a parcel carrier, a zone skip kind of thing, where they're only using the parcel carrier for the local, I'll say local, but local zone, if you will, kind of PMD. But the couriers are an interesting mix. And of course, we've all seen Amazon do that over the years, either hire people or supplement their own group with local couriers to do things. And then, running that autonomously is always the beauty of, if you contract with couriers, you can start to run autonomous logistics where, the courier is being routed and managed by the system. So no one's going in and doing anything other than letting the orders feed through and making sure they get delivered. And then again, taking into account any of the adjustments dynamically as they occur.
Yeah, and I can add on to that too, just a little bit. So back in my past, when I was with a customer, one of the companies you mentioned earlier, when you introduced us, one of the things that we did with ecom, to your point, was basically we contracted with a land, we were a shipper, right? So we contracted with an LTL carrier who actually took it across country to a break bulk or a pool distribution and did all the distribution of the e-com on the East Coast into one of their facilities. And it sped things up and drove our costs down, right? I think we've also talked about even parcel. If you can take all your parcel and zone skip it and put it into a truckload to, from say Pennsylvania to Dallas or Pennsylvania to another zone, put it into the network there for a FedEx or UPS, you're way better off, right? You're reducing those empty miles. You're actually driving your cost down, and also you're helping your cost to your customers get reduced as well. So
Yeah,
anyway,
and
that
just
was
to
just
add
kind of
on
shipping.
there, right? It's not just doing that, but still meeting the service requirements that are, needed, need by dates, those type of things, and not violating any of that. Right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and fellas, kind of related to that same question, another question from our audience, how does MercuryGate's acquisition of Cheetah affect the solutions and the services provided in that final mile?
That's a great question, Steve. I'll let you start and I'll add on if I need
Okay.
to.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously it was huge. I mean, it's an awesome software product. Things that excite me about it is the way it's both its predictive and prescriptive type analytics being, machine fed back into the process so that, it can become totally self-running, if you will. We have one customer that has large fleets all over the country, and they run it with a skeleton staff, and it's all managed autonomously. So they only deal with, if a truck breaks down or something maybe out of the norm, they have to deal with. They don't deal with normal routings or, and as orders drop and returns drop, the system just deals with it automatically. So the product's really strong, and that's where we've done. It actually works not just with couriers and drivers and trucks, but with autonomous vehicles as well, whether they're, autonomous cars or self-driving cars, trucks, or even drones, as we mentioned before. So,
Yeah, and then, for me, some of my past, I was with a 3PL for many years, LTL carrier, then 3PL, and I always thought we were getting closer and closer to a cradle to grave, if you will, supply chain where you got first mile and final mile, and plus the over the road, or anything else, could be multimodal. I think Cheetah, when we purchased Cheetah and we brought it in, it is our first and final mile product. That solved a big open for me when at MercuryGate. It solved that cradle to grave, if you will. And then in addition to that, I would say the cool thing about it is it does handle things such as, final mile delivery when you're in that throes of it and you got bad traffic, you got to reroute it does it pretty dynamically automated and that type of thing. That's pretty cool stuff. When you're, and of course that was how it was built initially. It was, the original founder said, "Hey, I ordered something from this company," and they couldn't tell me when they're going to deliver it, or they tried to deliver it, and then they kept moving it out, moving it around. I never knew when it was going to show up. That this system automatically adjusts those routes for drivers, and it's pretty dynamic. To your point about the large company that does a lot of deliveries every day, that's now running out of a single office, skeleton crew, where they used to have people all over the country. Now they're down to what I think it was like 6 people, skeleton crew running 24/7. So it's pretty awesome.
yeah, it's cool. And I just add on there, I mean, you made me think of, you know, first and final mile, yeah, but the real power of the tools, I say tools, meaning MercuryGate and Cheetah combined, is now we've got first mile, then we've got our optimization, multimodal optimization tools that take into account the middle mile stuff, right? And whether it's ocean, air, uh, multi-stop truckload, you name it, it's going through that process. And then, for the final leg, street level optimization out the door, we've got our final mile product to do that too. So it's
Oh,
really
cool.
powerful and really cool.
Yeah.
Great information. We got another question here from our audience. This goes back to the data question and the topic that you addressed earlier in our presentation. You talk about data quality and the curation of data. What can you do to improve the data? And I believe this is coming from a shipper. So as a shipper, what can I do to improve my data?
Yeah, that's I'm a I'm a data bigot, right? And I really love analytics. And for all that stuff to be successful, you got to start with good data. I was talking to Trevor Reed at Logistics the other day, and he was talking about the data curation, and he hopes this decade is the decade that transportation does the data curation that it needs to do. And he made a point that, you know, part of transportation's problem is we get a lot of data from other places. And quite often that data isn't really the right data for transportation. So we get data from an ERP system. Well, you know, it's not the data that the TMS or the transportation system needs to move the freight, right? So it really is an interesting problem. And there are tools today in many of the systems that help you do that. So I think of in our own system of tracking messages. So we get in tracking messages, and let's say for whatever reason that tracking message doesn't match a load in the TMS. Well, what happens? Do we just throw it away? No, we don't. We load it in and create, I've heard people call them ghost or phantom loads that any subsequent tracking messages will match to. At the same time, a user is notified that, hey, you've got unmatched tracking messages. You might want to go look and see what's going on here. And oh, by the way, it looks like it's a bad SCAC or carrier ID, or it's a bad primary reference or bad whatever, right? And so we give tools that then allow the user to say, look, this is a bad uh, um, carrier ID, match it to this load. And it'll actually take those messages, match them. But more importantly, you can notify the carrier to say, hey, your office in so-and-so is sending in bad data, right? So that you start to fix the problem. I mean, the beginning of fixing problems is identifying them, right? And that just gives you an idea of something that you can look at. I've seen it as well on, you know, we start projects and you'll hear the customer will say, I'll say to them, hey, what do you want to do with your master data? And they'll be like, oh, I don't care, just load it. Well, you know, they've got 7 different ERP systems. Of those 7 different ERP systems, this location's in each one a dozen times, right? So I'm looking at like the same record represented multiple times, and now if I load X, none of the other systems will match to it. You get the idea. So, you know, you really have to come up with a plan of attack when you start these processes to get this stuff under control and figure out a way to get from poor data to clean data. And the rewards and benefits are tremendous on the backside of that.
Yeah, I think to that point too, Steve, I think if you have a system that's able to actually help you do that, facilitate that cleanup of your data, you take that clean data and you begin combining that with other data, pretty soon you got a pretty good pool of how things have been operating, and then you can start being more prescriptive as you go forward, right? That's really the future of where the data is going to take you. And everything's data now. Everything you do is captured. So you got to figure out what part of the data do you really want as your master data? Not all of it, right? You want certain segments of it, but there's a whole school of thought around how do you build out a data platform, a data lake, and those types of things, and then report out on that. But again, back to your point, I mean, if you have a system that's actually helping you do that, and it identifies things, and you can go in and realign things and make it better and fix it so it doesn't happen again in the future, it's spot on. That's a great way to go about it.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer there. And we're going to go back to our audience for another question. We do have time for a few more questions. If our audience members want to submit one, just use the Q&A panel there. Our next question is, with the advancements of integration platforms, do you still recommend master data living in the TMS if it's not necessary?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I'm all for, you know, part of master data strategies is systems of record, right? So to your point, if the system of record is X, then that should be the system of record, right? So the master data shouldn't live in the TMS. The data should be fed from the system of record. There can't be 2 systems of record. It doesn't work. Been around this long enough to know when that happens, you end up in a mess. And trying to keep 2 in sync and it's really difficult. So no, I would not recommend duplicating the data in the TMS. I would recommend feeding the data from the system of record to the TMS, and then letting that system of record keep it up to date. So it's always interesting, right? Sometimes you can have master data, but it can be extended within another system. So, and I'll just say like the master data might be a location, but in the TMS, I need to maintain docks or something. I don't know. You get the idea. There's something though that extends the information, or maybe it's contact information about that location. To me, that's kind of fair game, but like changing an address or I've seen it before where we get a location passed to us. We'll go out and standardize the location, and now it looks different, right? So it's not a good way of. So every time it comes in, we're standardized. It becomes kind of a mess. And then when we pass back to the other system, it doesn't really jive, right? So I mean, it's an interesting problem, but there has to be a system of record.
Hey, Steve, maybe you could talk a little bit about too blockchain. We've had those conversations, right? How does that fit into that process?
Blockchain's interesting, right? I mean, uh, certainly when you look at what's going on, that's another thing that's going on in the world with the cryptocurrencies, right? Well, blockchain starts to the big benefit is, right, you've got one source of the truth and everybody's sharing in that truth, right? So the participants all do what they do as part of the chain, but um, all have the appropriate visibility when needed as things flow through. So again, it's not so much that everybody's changing things to their world, right? I mean, think about non-blockchain kind of stuff. Well, you do invoices in your system, pass them to mine. Now I have to do stuff to that invoice to make it work in my system, and then I pass it to somebody else, and they have to make it work in their. So you know what I mean. So the idea to get to that unified view of the world is really powerful. Um, I think in transportation, it could really be even more powerful because you think about, in an ERP, there's, let's say X number of participants. Well, in a transportation system, it could be 10X, 100X, right? Think of all the parties involved. I mean, you guys have all seen it. We get an invoice from a carrier and it's in one currency with, a handling charge in another currency in a local port. And, it just you get some really goofy things. And, I think blockchain has a really good chance of solving that. And then maybe the next big question is when will uh, transportation companies start to, and maybe some are, that I don't know about, but when will they start to accept crypto as a means of payment, right? And it's a bit fluid right now, but certainly be an interesting thing. So
Agreed.
Looks like we've got time for just about one more question. I do want to make sure we get to it because I think it's important, certainly with all the volatility in freight capacity and all of the other challenges that we talked about. Digital freight matching, what role do you see that continuing to play as we move into Q2 and Q3 and this volatility potentially continues?
yeah, no, I think it just continues to grow, right? And I think what's going to happen is it's going to become more streamlined. And your first reaction might be, well, it's kind of streamlined now. I get a rate and I can book it, right? But I think you're going to see things. When I say more streamlined, it's going to be more, a lot of sort of uh, folks who want to self-enroll, right? Like, hey, I want to get CH Robinson or Carrier A or Uber or whomever to now be one of my partners, right? I think what you're going to start to see too is those partners looking and saying, "Hey, I've got availability here," or "I've got an empty truck here. Are you interested in this stuff?" And it might be done a little bit different. I don't know, but think again about the sustainability side of that. Here's a way for a digital freight partner to feed into the process and let somebody know that, hey, if you pick this, you're cutting X amount of empty miles out of the overall, you're stopping one of those empty trucks going down the road, right? And I think that's going to start to be the powerful play here, and give away for or give the tool for people that compete against each other today, maybe to be cooperative, even though they may not know it, right? But maybe not so much in their face that, hey, my competitor's empty truck is now going to be my full truck, but rather I'm helping, and maybe I save money by getting a backhaul or maybe whatever that might be. But nonetheless, I see that whole market as growing into that area more and more, and being more than just, hey, give me a rate for this lane, and if I need it, I'll use it, to being, hey, well, let's look and give me some alternatives. Let me know. I mean, I've got 10 trucks from carrier B. Well, if you can handle this lane, then I can use those 10 trucks on these other 10 moves, right? So it's a little bit different look at things, I think. And kind of excited to see where that all plays out in the not too distant future.
Great information. And again, we are approaching the top of the hour, so we'll conclude our webinar. Thanks very much for sharing some of your time with us today. And special thanks as well to Steve and Phil for sharing a lot of great information. To learn more about MercuryGate's transportation solutions, visit MercuryGate.com. That's where you can find out about TMS, claims management, and final mile solutions for your modern supply chain challenges. You can also access regular transportation industry updates in our Knowledge Center. Look for Logistics Landscape in the Industry Reports section of our Resources page. You'll get updated gas prices, spot rates, news insights from our experts, our partners, and the transportation industry at large. On behalf of Steve Blough, Phil Melton, and everyone at MercuryGate International, thank you for joining us for this look at the logistics landscape.
Thank you.
Great one. Yeah, see you guys.